Have you ever woken up in the morning and felt, just for a moment, that your legs weren't quite the same as they used to be? Maybe it's a subtle heaviness, a little stiffness, or the way the floor feels a bit further away when you swing your feet off the bed. For some, it's the quiet ache after a day spent with grandchildren, or the hesitation before climbing the stairs. For others, it's the memory of how easy it once was to walk through the park, to dance at a family wedding, to step out into the world without a second thought. If any of this feels familiar, you're not alone. In fact, you're part of a silent community of millions, people who have spent their lives moving, caring, building, loving, and now find themselves pausing, wondering, is this just what happens as we get older? There's a kind of loneliness in that question, but there's also a spark, a tiny, persistent hope that maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Let me tell you about a man named David. He's 72, a retired mechanic, and the proud grandfather of 3 energetic little boys. Not long ago, David noticed that he was starting to avoid certain things. He'd skipped the walk to the corner store, let his wife carry the groceries, and sit out the family soccer games in the yard. He told himself it was normal, just aging, he'd say with a shrug. But late at night, he'd lie in bed and remember the feeling of running, the freedom of moving without fear. He missed it more than he cared to admit. One afternoon, as David watched his grandsons chase a ball across the grass, he felt a pang, not just of longing, but of determination. He wanted to be part of their world, not just an observer on the sidelines. That was the moment something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even visible to anyone else. But inside, David decided, I want my legs to carry me. Not just through today, but through all the days I still have left. Maybe you've had a moment like that too. A quiet promise to yourself, spoken in the privacy of your heart. Maybe it's not about soccer in the yard. Maybe it's about walking to your favorite cafe, tending your roses, or simply feeling steady when you get out of bed. Whatever your reason, it matters. Because your legs are more than just muscles and bones. They are your freedom, your connection to the world, your ticket to independence. We live in a world that often tells us to accept decline as inevitable. It's just part of getting older, people say, as if the story is already written. But what if that's not the whole truth? What if your body, even now, is quietly asking for a little more care, a little more kindness, a little more nourishment? What if, instead of surrendering to weakness, you could invite in a new chapter, one where every step feels a little more confident, a little lighter, a little more yours? This isn't about turning back the clock or pretending age doesn't matter. It's about honoring the journey you've taken and believing that growth is possible at every stage of life. It's about listening to your body, not with frustration or disappointment, but with curiosity and compassion. Because the truth is, your legs have carried you through so much already. They've been there for every celebration, every challenge, every ordinary day. They deserve your gratitude, your attention, and your hope. When David decided to do something about his legs, he didn't know where to start. He wasn't interested in boot camps or fancy gym memberships. He just wanted to feel strong again, to trust his own body. So he did something simple. He started paying attention to what he ate. Not in a restrictive, joyless way, but as an act of self-respect. He began to wonder, what if the food I choose could help my legs feel steadier? What if I could give myself a little more strength, one meal at a time? It's a question worth asking, because while exercise and movement are important, there's another piece of the puzzle that often gets overlooked: nourishment. The right foods, chosen with care, can be a gentle medicine for your legs. They can rebuild what time has worn down, support what feels shaky, and offer a quiet promise that your best days aren't all behind you. I know it can feel overwhelming. There's so much advice out there: diets, supplements, miracle cures. But what if it doesn't have to be complicated? What if the answer is as simple as adding a few powerful foods to your daily routine? Foods that are easy to find, delicious to eat, and proven by science to support the strength and resilience your legs need. Imagine, just for a moment, waking up and feeling a little more sure of yourself. Imagine walking outside and not thinking twice about the steps ahead. Imagine the pride of joining your family in the garden, the park, or the kitchen, wherever life takes you. That's not just a dream. It's a possibility that begins with small, loving choices. Right now, you might feel unsure. You might wonder if change is really possible, if it's worth the effort. I want you to know, you are not alone in those doubts, but you are also not alone in your hope. Every day, people like David, and like you, are discovering that it's never too late to start caring for their bodies in new ways. They're finding strength not by fighting against age, but by working with it, honoring it, and nourishing it. So, as we start this journey together, I invite you to set aside any guilt or regret about the past. This isn't about what you should have done or what you wish you'd known. It's about what you can do right now, today, with the resources and wisdom you already have. It's about believing that your legs and your life are still full of possibility. Because here's the truth: the story of your legs isn't finished yet. There are still places to go, people to see, memories to make. And it all begins with a single step. A step toward nourishment, toward strength, toward hope. Are you ready to take that step? Because your journey starts now, and I'll be right here with you, every stride of the way. Have you ever paused, just for a moment, to think about the silent power of a single meal? For years, we move through life almost on autopilot. Breakfast is a quick cup of coffee, lunch is whatever's convenient, and dinner might be something simple, just to fill the emptiness in our stomachs. But as time passes and our bodies quietly start to change, the way we eat begins to matter more than ever. David, the man whose story we started to follow, used to laugh when his wife would fuss over what they ate. "It's just food," he'd say, waving off her careful questions about vegetables and proteins. He was a man who loved his routines, who found comfort in the familiar taste of white bread and sweet tea. But after his fall, after that long, lonely night in the hospital, he began to see things differently. The truth is, when you're young, your body forgives a lot. You can skip meals, eat late, indulge in sweets, and somehow bounce back the next day. But as the years go by, the body becomes less forgiving. Muscles don't recover as quickly. Joints ache a little longer. And every skipped meal, every day without enough protein or vitamins, quietly adds up. It's like a savings account you forgot to check. One day, you wake up and realize the balance is lower than you ever expected. David's journey back to strength didn't start with a grand gesture. There was no dramatic diet overhaul, no sudden switch to green juices or expensive supplements. Instead, it began with something much smaller: a bowl of oatmeal. His wife, gentle and persistent, started making him breakfast every morning. At first, David grumbled. He missed his sugary cereal, the sweet comfort of pastries. But day after day, she'd set down a warm bowl of oats, sometimes with a handful of nuts, sometimes with slices of banana. She never lectured him. She just smiled, poured him a cup of tea and sat beside him while he ate. It seemed almost too simple to matter. But after a few weeks, David noticed something strange. He didn't feel as tired in the afternoons. His legs, still weak, didn't tremble as much when he stood up. The stairs that once seemed impossible now felt a little less daunting. He couldn't explain it, but he didn't need to. The change was real, and it started with something as humble as breakfast. Food, he realized, wasn't just fuel. It was a message to his body. You matter, you're worth taking care of. Each meal became a small act of hope, a quiet promise that he wasn't giving up on himself. Of course, not every day was easy. Some mornings, David woke up frustrated, wishing for the energy he once took for granted. There were days when the oatmeal tasted bland, when the effort of chewing seemed too much. But his wife would sit with him, sometimes sharing stories from their younger days, sometimes just holding his hand in silence. Those moments, he later admitted, were as nourishing as the food itself. Gradually, David's meals grew more colorful. Lunch became a simple soup with carrots and chicken, or a sandwich with fresh lettuce and tomato. Dinner was often a small piece of fish with steamed vegetables. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. But each bite was chosen with care, each ingredient a quiet investment in tomorrow. He learned, through trial and error, that it wasn't about perfection. Some days he still craved sweets, and sometimes he gave in. But he no longer saw food as the enemy, or as something to be rushed through. Instead, he began to savor the act of eating, to appreciate the textures and flavors, to notice how his body responded. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, his confidence returned. He started walking a little farther each day, venturing outside to feel the sun on his face. He began to believe, in a way he hadn't for months, that his body could still surprise him, could still get stronger, one meal at a time. David's story isn't unique. All across the world, there are people just like him, men and women who, after a lifetime of caring for others, suddenly find themselves needing care. It's easy to feel helpless, to believe that aging is a one-way street, that weakness is inevitable. But every day, in kitchens and dining rooms everywhere, small acts of courage take place. A bowl of soup, a slice of fruit, a glass of water. These are the tools of resilience, the quiet ways we fight back against time. If you're listening to this now, maybe you recognize a bit of yourself in David's story. Maybe you've felt the same frustration, the same longing for strength and independence. Maybe you, too, have brushed off the importance of a meal, telling yourself that it doesn't matter, that it's too late to change. But here's the truth. It's never too late. Every meal is a new beginning, another chance to send your body the message it's been waiting for. You don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to do it alone. Maybe it starts with breakfast, or maybe with a single apple or a glass of milk. What matters is that you start. And if you stumble, if you have days when you fall back into old habits, remember David. Remember the power of small steps, of quiet persistence, of letting someone sit beside you and remind you that you're not alone. As the days passed, David found himself looking forward to meals, not just for the food, but for the promise they held. Each one was a victory, a reminder that even in the smallest choices, there is hope. And with hope, anything is possible. So tonight, as you prepare your next meal, take a moment to notice the colors on your plate, the warmth of the food, the simple act of nourishing yourself. It may seem small, but in that moment, you are choosing life. You are choosing strength. And that, perhaps, is the greatest gift you can give yourself. There's something about the first steps after a long setback that feels both terrifying and exhilarating. For David, the world outside his front door had become a distant memory. The garden he once tended, the sidewalk where he used to wave at neighbors, even the simple act of feeling the morning sun on his face. All of it seemed impossibly far away during those weeks when getting out of bed was a struggle. But healing, as David learned, rarely happens all at once. It's not a single triumphant leap. Instead, it's a series of small choices, each one a quiet act of courage. One morning, as the light filtered softly through the curtains, David sat on the edge of his bed and stared at his shoes. They looked ordinary, a little worn, but in that moment, they might as well have been hiking boots at the base of a mountain. His wife was waiting in the hallway, her hand gentle on his arm. "Let's just try," she whispered, her voice a mixture of hope and worry. The hallway seemed longer than he remembered. Every step was slow, deliberate, and unsteady. But with each movement, David felt something shift inside him. A flicker of confidence, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he could trust his body again. They reached the front door together. She opened it, letting in a rush of fresh air and the distant sounds of birds. For a moment, David hesitated. The outside world felt too big, too unpredictable. But then he remembered the meals they'd shared, the laughter, the small victories that had brought him to this point. He took a breath, and together they stepped outside. The sidewalk was cool beneath his feet. The sun warmed his face, and he could smell the faint sweetness of blooming flowers. Each step was careful, but with every movement, the fear began to loosen its grip. Neighbors waved from across the street, offering smiles and quiet encouragement. David's wife kept pace beside him, never rushing, always ready to steady him if he faltered. They walked only a few yards that first day, but it felt like crossing a continent. By the time they returned inside, David was exhausted, but something had changed. He had tasted freedom again, however brief. The next day, he walked a little farther. The day after that, farther still. Progress was slow, and there were setbacks. Days when his legs trembled, when he wanted to give up and retreat to the safety of his chair. But each time, his wife was there, reminding him of how far he'd come. Sometimes, the hardest part of recovery isn't the pain or the weakness, it's the doubt. The voice inside that whispers, "You'll never get back to where you were." David heard that voice often, especially in the quiet hours of the night. But with every step, every meal, every shared smile, he learned to answer back. Maybe not, but I can get somewhere new. There was a day, weeks after that first walk, when David found himself standing in the garden again. The roses needed pruning, and the grass had grown wild. He knelt down, feeling the earth beneath his hands, the familiar ache in his knees. For a moment, he closed his eyes and let the memories wash over him. Summer afternoons spent weeding, the laughter of grandchildren chasing butterflies, the quiet pride of a well-tended yard. And in that moment, he understood. Healing wasn't about returning to the past. It was about finding meaning in the present. His wife joined him, kneeling in the dirt, her hands working beside his. They didn't speak much, just the occasional comment about a stubborn weed or a new bud. The silence was comfortable, filled with shared history and unspoken gratitude. When they finished, David sat back on his heels, his body tired, but his spirit light. The journey back was never a straight line. There were days when David stumbled, when old pains flared up, when frustration threatened to undo his progress. But there were also days of joy, when he made it to the corner store on his own, when he shared a meal with friends, when he danced, awkwardly but joyfully, at his granddaughter's birthday. Through it all, David discovered something he hadn't expected: resilience. Not just physical strength, but the quiet determination that comes from facing fear and moving forward anyway. He learned that it was okay to accept help, to lean on others, to celebrate small victories. And he realized that every person, no matter their age or circumstance, carries within them the capacity to begin again. If you're listening to this, maybe you're standing at your own front door, uncertain about what comes next. Maybe you've faced setbacks that left you doubting your strength, questioning whether you'll ever feel whole again. It's easy to believe that healing is out of reach, that the best days are behind you. But David's story is a reminder that hope can be found in the smallest of steps. You don't have to walk alone. Whether it's a loved one at your side, a neighbor waving from across the street, or simply the memory of better days, there is always something or someone to guide you forward. And every bit of progress, no matter how modest, is worth celebrating. As the seasons changed and the garden bloomed once more, David found himself looking forward to each new day. He still had challenges, still faced moments of doubt, but he greeted them with a quiet confidence born from experience. He knew now that strength wasn't just measured by how far he could walk or how much he could lift, but by his willingness to keep moving forward, to keep trying, to keep believing. So, if you find yourself at the beginning of your own journey, whether it's recovering from an illness, rebuilding after a loss, or simply searching for a new sense of purpose, remember this: every step matters. Every meal shared, every laugh, every moment of connection is a thread in the tapestry of your life. And with each day, you are weaving something beautiful, something uniquely yours. Tonight, as you rest, take a moment to reflect on how far you've come. Celebrate the small victories, honor the challenges, and look ahead with hope. The road back home may be long and winding, but with each step, you are moving closer to a future filled with possibility. Shared tables, shared hearts, finding connection in every meal. There's a quiet magic that happens when people gather around a table. It doesn't matter if the meal is grand or simple, if the plates match, or if the bread is store-bought. What matters is the company, the laughter, the gentle clinking of glasses, and the feeling, sometimes unspoken, that you belong. For David, the journey back to strength wasn't just about his own determination. It was about rediscovering the comfort of community, the warmth of shared stories, and the healing that comes from letting others in. After months of solitude and uncertainty, he found himself longing for more than just physical recovery. He wanted to feel alive again, to be part of something bigger than himself. It started with a phone call. His daughter, whose visits had grown rare as life pulled her in different directions, called one afternoon with a simple request. "Dad, can we come over for dinner this weekend?" She asked, her voice hopeful, almost hesitant. David hesitated too, glancing down at his hands, remembering the days when he could cook a feast without thinking twice. But then he remembered the way his wife's eyes lit up at the thought of family. And he agreed. The days leading up to that dinner felt like preparing for a celebration. David and his wife worked together, chopping vegetables, stirring soup, setting the table with mismatched plates and faded napkins. The house filled with the familiar scents of garlic and herbs, and for the first time in a long while, David felt anticipation instead of worry. When the doorbell rang, the house came alive. His daughter swept in with her husband and their 2 children, laughter spilling into every room. The grandchildren raced through the hallway, their energy infectious, their questions endless. David watched as his wife guided them into the kitchen, showing them how to knead dough, how to taste the soup, and decide if it needed more salt. Dinner was a joyful chaos. Stories tumbled out between bites, old memories mixed with new jokes, and the simple act of passing a bowl became a gesture of love. David found himself smiling more than he had in months, his heart light, his worries forgotten. He realized, as he watched his family eat and laugh and reach for seconds, that healing isn't just about the body. It's about connection. It's about feeling seen and needed and loved. After dinner, as the children curled up on the couch and his daughter helped clear the dishes, David sat quietly at the table, his hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea. He listened to the gentle hum of conversation, the clatter of plates, the soft lull of his wife's voice. In that moment, he felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the food, but for the people who shared it with him. That night, as he lay in bed, David thought about all the meals he'd eaten alone over the past year. He remembered the silence, the way the food lost its flavor, the heaviness that settled in his chest. And he promised himself that things would be different. He would open his door more often, invite friends and neighbors, find reasons to celebrate even the smallest victories. It wasn't always easy. There were days when fatigue crept in, when the idea of hosting felt overwhelming. But each time he pushed through, each time he welcomed someone into his home, he felt his world grow a little brighter. He learned that you don't have to do everything yourself. Sometimes the greatest gift is letting others help, letting them bring a dish, share a story, or simply sit with you in companionable silence. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by with a basket of fresh tomatoes from her garden. She stayed for tea, and they talked about everything and nothing: the weather, the price of groceries, the memories that lingered in the corners of their quiet street. David realized then that connection doesn't always require grand gestures. Sometimes it's as simple as sharing a cup of tea, as easy as saying yes when someone offers company. As the weeks passed, David's table became a gathering place. Friends dropped in for coffee, neighbors brought homemade bread, and laughter echoed through the house. Even on days when his legs ached or his energy waned, he found comfort in the presence of others. The meals themselves became less important than the moments they created. The chance to listen, to share, to remember that no one has to face life's challenges alone. If you're hearing this now, maybe you know the ache of loneliness. Maybe you've sat at a table set for one, wishing for someone to share the meal, the conversation, the simple act of being together. It's easy to believe that connection is out of reach, that the world has moved on without you. But David's story is a gentle reminder. The door can always be opened. The table can always be set for one more. You don't have to wait for a special occasion. Every meal is a reason to gather. Every cup of tea a chance to invite someone in. It doesn't matter if the meal is perfect or if the conversation falters. What matters is the effort, the willingness to reach out, the courage to let others see you just as you are. As David learned, healing is not a solitary journey. It's a path we walk together, hand in hand, heart to heart. Each shared meal, each story told, each moment of laughter is a step toward wholeness. A reminder that we are stronger, braver, and more resilient when we are connected. So tonight, as you sit down to eat, consider who you might invite to join you. Reach out to a friend, a neighbor, a family member. Share a meal, a story, a smile. In doing so, you'll not only nourish your body, you'll feed your spirit and help someone else find their way back to hope. There's a quiet moment, sometime in the early morning, when the world seems to hold its breath. The sun is just beginning to rise, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, and everything feels possible. For David, these moments became a kind of ritual, a gentle reminder that every day is a new beginning, no matter what came before. As spring gave way to summer, David found himself noticing things he'd once taken for granted. The way dew sparkled on the grass, the cheerful chatter of birds outside his window, the scent of fresh coffee drifting through the house. Each detail felt like a small gift, a sign that life was still unfolding, still offering beauty, even after hardship. His body was different now. The illness had left its mark. Some days his steps were slower, his hands less steady. But instead of focusing on what he'd lost, David tried to embrace what remained. He learned to move at his own pace, to listen to his body's quiet wisdom, to find joy in the ordinary. One morning, as he sat on the porch with his wife, he watched the world wake up. The garden was alive with color, and the air was filled with the promise of a warm day. They talked about the seasons, how each one brought its own challenges and gifts, how change was both inevitable and necessary. David realized that he, too, was changing, not just physically, but in ways that were harder to see. He was learning patience, learning to forgive himself for the days when progress was slow. He was learning gratitude, not just for the big milestones, but for the countless small victories that made up his journey. There was a time, not so long ago, when David measured his worth by what he could do. If he couldn't mow the lawn, cook a full meal, or carry groceries without help, he felt less than whole. But as the months passed, he discovered a deeper truth. His value had nothing to do with productivity. It was found in his kindness, his resilience, his willingness to keep going, even when things were hard. One afternoon, his granddaughter came to visit. She found David in the garden, kneeling beside a patch of wildflowers. "Grandpa, why do you plant so many flowers?" she asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. David smiled, brushing soil from his hands. "Because every flower is a promise," he told her. "A promise that something beautiful can grow, even after a long winter." They spent the afternoon together, planting seeds and telling stories. David showed her how to press the soil gently, how to water without washing the seeds away. He watched her face light up with wonder, and he felt a quiet pride, a sense that he was passing on more than just gardening tips. He was teaching her about hope, about patience, about the magic of beginnings. Later, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned to gold, David sat quietly, reflecting on the seasons of his own life. He thought about the winters, the losses, the setbacks, the days when hope seemed far away. He thought about the springs, the moments of renewal, the unexpected joys, the times when he found strength he didn't know he had. He realized that every season, even the hardest ones, had shaped him. They had taught him to be gentle with himself, to accept help when he needed it, to celebrate progress in all its forms. Most of all, they had taught him that change is not something to fear, but something to embrace. If you're listening now, maybe you're facing your own season of change. Maybe your body feels unfamiliar, or your heart is heavy with loss. Maybe you're struggling to find your place in a world that seems to move too fast. It's easy to feel left behind, to believe that your best days are over. But David's story is a reminder that every season brings its own kind of beauty. Even in the midst of challenge, there are moments of grace, quiet mornings, shared laughter, the simple pleasure of watching something grow. You are not defined by what you can or cannot do. You are defined by your courage, your compassion, your ability to begin again. As summer turned to fall, David continued to find meaning in the everyday. He volunteered at the local community center, helping others who were recovering from illness. He shared his story, not to boast, but to offer hope, to show that healing is possible, that life can be rich and full even after loss. He learned that giving back was its own kind of medicine. Each act of kindness, each connection made, helped him heal a little more. He discovered that by helping others, he was also helping himself, building a life that was not just about survival, but about joy. On the anniversary of his illness, David gathered his family and friends for a simple meal in the garden. They ate under the open sky, surrounded by flowers and laughter and love. As the evening light faded, David raised a glass and thanked everyone for walking this journey with him. "I'm not the same man I was a year ago," he said, his voice steady, "but I'm grateful for the changes. They've made me who I am, and I'm excited to see what comes next." As the stars appeared overhead, David felt a deep sense of peace. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, more winters, more uncertain days, but he also knew that he was ready. He had learned to trust the seasons, to welcome change, to find hope in every new beginning. So, if you find yourself standing at the threshold of change, take heart. The road ahead may be uncertain, but it is also filled with possibility. Every sunrise brings a chance to start again, to grow, to become the person you are meant to be. Tonight, as you close your eyes, remember, you are not alone. You are part of a larger story, a story of resilience, of hope, of endless new beginnings. Embrace the changes, trust the journey, and know that you are enough, just as you are.